Welcome, everybody, to this Facebook live stream where we explore the intersection between Christianity and science. My name is Dr. Fuz Rana. I am a biochemist, a Christian apologist, and I'm also the Vice President of Research and Apologetics at Reasons to Believe. RTV sponsors this live stream, so if you want to know more about our organization, I would invite you to go to our website, www.reasons.org. Hey, today we're going to take on a really provocative question. Will the COVID-19 pandemic accelerate and add credibility to the transhumanism movement? Will the COVID-19 pandemic add to the credibility and accelerate the acceptance of transhumanism? Well, we're going to take on that really provocative question in just a minute. But before we do that, I would love for you to do a favor for me, if you don't mind. Take a moment, if you're watching this broadcast, whether as a live stream or as a recording, to check in, say hi. Let me know who you are and where you're watching from. Use the comment section to do that. It's really helpful information for us to have, but also it's a great way for me to get to know you, because I really want to know who is it that is watching these broadcasts and why you're interested in the science-faith conversation. So great way for me to get to know you. So please take the time to do that. Also, I would invite you to offer your thoughts and your perspectives on this question. Even if you don't agree with me, I really want to know what you think about the relationship between the COVID-19 pandemic and the transhumanism movement. And then last but not least, please use the comment section to suggest topics that you would like to see me address on future broadcasts. Please take a moment and ask a question that you would like to see me engage on a future broadcast. I want you to let you know that I read every question, every comment that you post. It means a lot to me to hear what you have to say. It means a lot to me when you check in and say hi. I can't respond to everything because of time constraints, but I want you to know that I do listen very carefully to what you have to say. Okay, well, let's go ahead and take on this question. Will the COVID-19 pandemic accelerate acceptance and add to the credibility of the transhumanism movement? Now, to be fair, this question wasn't even on my radar screen until about a week and a half ago, when my friend Nikos Katsakanis, who is in the United Kingdom, sent me a message asking if I would appear on his program called The Influencers Cafe. This is a podcast that Nikos hosts, and he wanted to address this question. And at first I thought, wow, this is kind of a bizarre question. It almost feels a little bit like a conspiracy theory type of thing. And then as I thought about it, I realized that this question was actually a really profound question, and that Nikos had a really important insight into the relationship between our response to the COVID-19 pandemic and the transhumanism movement. And that our response to the COVID-19 pandemic, I believe, is actually going to make the transhumanism movement and the vision of transhumanists much more acceptable, much more palatable to the general populace around the world. And so I'm going to unpack why I think that is the case. But the first thing that I think we need to do is address the question, what exactly is transhumanism and what motivates the transhumanist movement? Because if we can't answer that question effectively until we understand, again, what really motivates transhumanism. And I actually find that a lot of people are not even aware of transhumanism, or if they are aware of it, or if they've heard the term, they actually don't understand what it means. Many people mistake transhumanism for transgenderism. And there's no relationship actually between the two. Transhumanism is in effect a intellectual and a cultural movement that has as its primary focus the use of science and technology to actually modify our biological makeup as human beings, to modify our biological makeup permanently as human beings, with an eye towards correcting our flaws and overcoming our inherent biological limitations, with the idea that through the use of technology, we can make human beings smarter, more psychologically well-adjusted, and physically stronger. That people that hold to a transhumanist view largely accept the idea of human evolution. And if you understand anything about the nature of the evolutionary process, the idea is that evolution never produces perfection. It produces organisms that are inherently flawed, that are inherently imperfect, and that are inherently limited. And so transhumanists would argue that that these inherent limitations and flaws actually create human misery and suffering and cause a lot of pain. They prevent human beings from properly flourishing. And that as we move more towards a technological civilization, a technological culture and society, that our evolution in a hunter-gatherer context means that physically, that biologically, that psychologically, that intellectually, we're not adapted to what the future holds for us in terms of the structure of society, in terms of the way technology is going to shape our cultures. And so they argue that in order to promote human flourishing, to drive human progress, to mitigate pain and suffering, we need to use technology to modify our biological makeup, that we have a moral obligation to actually do this very thing. Now, this transhumanism movement traces its genesis back to the book Daedalus, written by J.B.S. Haldane in the early 1900s, where Haldane was a British geneticist. He was an atheist, and he argued that as we learn more about our genetic makeup as human beings, one day we'll be able to take control of our genetic makeup and dictate our genetic future in such a way that we can, again, modify human beings and create human beings with certain desired biological properties that would be perfectly suited for what society needs. People that are transhumanist actually see us taking control of our own evolution, really ushering in a post-human era where we modify human beings to such a degree that what we have created will no longer be recognizable to us today as actually being human beings, but we would be forced to view these entities that we would create as really being post-human species, and maybe even a collection of post-human species. And again, the idea is that if we are the product of evolution, we're going to continue to evolve. Where we are now is just on the way station of our evolutionary journey, so why not take control of our own evolution, ushering in, again, a post-human era, a post-human future. Now, for many people, this idea of transhumanism, which again has been with us since the early 1900s, really was an idea that fit more within the context of science fiction. Most people viewed this idea as a fringe idea. Most people didn't take it seriously. And then suddenly something happened about 5 years ago or so, and that was the simultaneous emergence of technologies that suddenly made it feasible to begin to pursue the transhumanism vision. This would be the advent of CRISPR gene editing, which is a very powerful tool that allows us to manipulate the genomes of organisms, including human beings. And people think that through the use of CRISPR gene editing, we can actually modify the genomes of human beings, and in doing so, actually treat, maybe even cure people of genetic disorders. But also that very same technology that could be used for biomedical purposes could also be used, in effect, to alter our genetic makeup as human beings. There's advances happening in computer-brain interface technology that allow patients to, with their brain activity, to control computer hardware and computer software. And this will revolutionize how we treat patients that are locked in, how we treat amputees, how we treat quadriplegics, giving them control of, again, computer software and machine hardware that will give them ability to communicate, the ability to gain mobility, the ability to have robotic prosthetic limbs that they can control, again, with their brain activities. But this same technology can also be used now to create human-machine cyborg type of entities. There is advances happening in anti-aging technology that hold the promise of extending our life expectancy for hundreds and hundreds of years. And so people are now looking at transhumanism as a way to extend our life expectancy to maybe even practical immortality. And in that sense, there now becomes a religious element to transhumanism, where people are looking at transhumanism to solve the ultimate existential crisis that we face as human beings, and that is our own our own mortality as individuals and the prospects of our own disappearance, our own extinction as a human species. And so therefore, they argue that technology is what's going to save us. Technology will grant us immortality. Technology will prevent humanity from going to extinction and will allow us to achieve our ultimate purpose and destiny. For somebody who holds to a materialistic, atheistic worldview, transhumanism becomes their eschatology. It becomes their hope for future things. And suddenly now, as an atheist or as a materialist or a non-theist, you no longer have to think about your existence coming to an end at your death, that you can actually overcome the inevitability of death through the use of technology. And so this idea here is that ultimately technology is going to save us. Technology, science and technology and reason are going to be the ways in which we create a utopian future where we mitigate pain and suffering, where we promote human progress and human flourishing. It's going to overcome the inevitability of our death, the inevitability of human extinction. Technology is what's going to save us. And this is an embodiment of Enlightenment thinking that has now come to full fruition in the transhumanist movement. So then what on earth does this have to do with the COVID-19 pandemic? Well, think about this for a minute. What is our response to the COVID-19 pandemic? It is essentially a scientific and technology all hands on deck scenario, where we are recognizing that if we're going to beat this pandemic, we've got to devote enormous amount of scientific resources, mobilizing as many people as we can around the world to understand the biology of the SARS-2 coronavirus. We have to employ technologists to develop vaccines, to develop different types of antiviral treatments and protocols to maybe arrest the infection cycle or delay the infection cycle long enough for our immune systems to get a hold of the response to the virus, to get on top of things and be able to respond to the virus. That we're looking to epidemiologists and public health officials to develop essentially public health policies that will help us to curtail the spread and bring this COVID-19 pandemic under control. In other words, we're looking to science and technology and medicine to actually solve this problem. And of course, this is absolutely appropriate. I'm not opposed to this whatsoever. I think this is, as a Christian, I see science and technology and medicine as gifts that God has given us as humanity, and that we should exercise these gifts to the fullest possible extent. So I'm not adopting an anti-science posture, but what I'm pointing out here is that I believe eventually science and medicine and biotechnology will actually get us out of this predicament that we're in. And as a result of that, this is one more feather in the cap of science and technology and medicine, rightly so. But that is going to create, again, and reinforce a mindset in many people that ultimately science and technology are going to be the way to solve our problems. And I already see many skeptics saying, well, what good is religion in a time of crisis? Religion doesn't solve these problems. It's science and technology that solve these problems. I've seen this objection flying all over the place, online, in social media outlets, in web articles, you name it. And in fact, we did a Facebook Live session a few weeks ago where we actually responded specifically to that objection. And I would invite you to go to our YouTube channel, Reasons to Believe 1, and check it out. But the first point is this, is that if, again, the COVID-19 pandemic is resolved by science and technology and medicine, it makes it much more comfortable for people to develop a mindset that where our salvation and our hope actually is going to come from is from what science can achieve. And this is exactly the motivation, this is exactly the undergirding mindset behind the transhumanism movement, which now means that people are going to be much more open to the prospects of transhumanism. On top of that, There are also a number of technologies that we are exploring that essentially are the very technologies that people envision being used to actually enhance human beings beyond our natural biological limits. So for example, CRISPR gene editing, again, is a very powerful tool. It's a very easy to use technique that is very powerful, that is a low cost technique that people think is going to revolutionize synthetic biology and biotechnology and biomedicine. And so this very technology, again, that can treat genetic disorders can be used to enhance human beings beyond our natural biological limits. But CRISPR gene editing actually could very well play a critical role in actually developing an antiviral treatment for the SARS-2 coronavirus. And this is illustrated by proof of principle studies that have already been done with the HIV virus. The HIV virus is an RNA virus like the SARS-2 coronavirus. And the HIV virus will actually, after it infects cells, can incorporate its genetic material into the genome of the host cell. And then it will lie dormant in that host cell genome and will have certain triggers that will lead to the expression of that viral genetic material and a flare-up of the HIV infection. And so people have recognized that using CRISPR gene editing technology, they could actually target HIV sequences in the genomes of infected cells and actually cut out those HIV, cut out that HIV genetic material, splicing the genome together at that site, and actually then reducing the viral load in the infected cell. And so people have taken that principle and have suggested that we can actually create guide RNAs that could target the SARS-2 coronavirus in a number of key spots where all you would have to do is cleave that genetic material in those key spots, and you could actually, again, reduce the viral load in infected cells, where you would have to develop a way to target the CRISPR gene editing package to the particular cells that, again, are likely to have the virus enter into the cell and begin to take over the cell's machinery, making more copies of the virus. So you'd have to develop a technique to target the CRISPR gene editing package to the right cells. But once you get that package targeted there, the guide RNA could direct you right to the viral genetic material and cleave it up and reduce, again, the viral load. And in fact, there was a proof of principle study published as a preprint where people demonstrated in vitro they could do this very thing. And are looking at how then do we extend this now into an in vivo application. So, and the point is that we very well could actually see CRISPR gene editing in the future as a way to treat viral infections. And this is actually a more elegant way to treat viral infections than actually using antiviral drugs, because now you could very specifically target the right type of cell and the right genetic material, so you wouldn't have all these side effects from the antiviral drugs that would be used, and that this approach could now then be generalized to treat any kind of viral infection by essentially just dialing in the guide RNA and figuring out how to deliver that package to the right cell type. And so I could easily envision a future where we turn to CRISPR gene editing as a way to treat, again, viral infections, viral outbreaks. And if that's the case, then we are going to psychologically be much more open to having a CRISPR gene editing treatment that might actually modify our genetic makeup, not only to treat genetic disorders, but maybe even to enhance our biological capacities beyond our natural limits. Another place where we might see CRISPR gene editing play a role in the future when it comes to these kind of pandemic outbreaks is actually illustrated by a proof of principle study that was very controversial, that was reported on about a year and a half ago by a Chinese scientist who created the very first genetically engineered human beings, who had their genomes genetically modified with CRISPR gene editing. And what he did is he took embryos that were created through in vitro fertilization, and using CRISPR gene editing, he disabled a gene that encodes for a receptor protein called the CCR5 protein. This protein is found on cell surfaces and is the point of entry for the HIV virus when it infects cells in the immune system. where the HIV virus will dock to the CCR5 receptor, and that will trigger events that will then internalize the HIV virus into these immune cells, beginning the process of viral infection. And so people have discovered that patients who are resistant to HIV actually have a genetic mutation in their CCR5 gene. And they don't seem to suffer any other biological consequence as a result of that mutation. So this researcher argued that I could genetically engineer human beings with CRISPR gene editing to be inherently resistant to HIV, and he did those experiments on the embryos, and then what he did that created again almost a universal outcry against his work was he took those embryos and he implanted them in the womb of a woman who carried the embryos to full term and gave birth to twin girls that were the very first human beings now to be genetically modified with CRISPR gene editing. But notice what he was able to successfully do is to create human beings who were inherently resistant to the HIV virus. And so you could even begin to envision in the future, if we're in the midst of something like this COVID-19 pandemic, where parents who are having children or who want to have children may opt to do in vitro fertilization and then actually have those embryos genetically modified so that the virus that is causing the pandemic at that time, or that is threatening that is threatening public health because of repeated outbreaks of that virus, that you would actually genetically engineer human beings either in such a way that they would no longer the virus no longer be able to recognize receptor sites that would lead to the internalization of the virus into the host cells, into the cells that are destined to be infected. So in other words, you could envision a future where if there are certain viral pathogens that represent an ongoing threat or a very intense threat at a particular point in time, that people would turn to CRISPR gene editing as a way to have children that would be no longer susceptible to that particular viral infection. And I'm sure many of us don't even remember polio, but my mother grew up with that being a very real threat to her health, is to contract the polio virus. And if people in the 1940s and 50s, when polio was widespread, could have had some kind of way to genetically modify their children so they would not get contract the polio virus, they probably would have agreed to do something like that out of the love for their children. But again, this becomes a slippery slope where we now, if we go down that kind of path, where we now are much more open-minded to the prospects of actually using CRISPR gene editing to modify our genetic makeup for something other than biomedical use, but actually for human enhancement. And when we talk about creating human beings that might be genetically inherently now resistant to certain viral infections, is this actually a biomedical procedure, or is this actually a human enhancement? You now are in this gray zone that again makes it much more likely that in the future people will be more open-minded to genetic modifications. Another place where I see technology emerging that again greases the skids towards the transhumanist vision is actually through technology that could very well be used to do highly efficient contact tracing. If we're going to bring this COVID-19 pandemic under control, I believe that the most important tool in our toolkit is not sheltering in place and social distancing. It may not even be the development of a vaccine, because there's no guarantee in my mind that we're going to have a vaccine. It's not going to be the development of antivirals. It's going to be effective implementation of contact tracing. And the idea behind contact tracing is really very elegant, that if somebody displays symptoms of having a particular viral infection, you interview that person and you find out who did they have contact with. And then in turn, you interview those people and find out who did they have contact with, and then you interview those people, who did they have contact with, and you ask all of those people to quarantine. And by doing that, for quarantining them for a couple of weeks, maybe a month, you have now effectively prevented them from spreading the virus to other people. And so the whole key is that when this factor that you may have heard of, R sub zero, when R sub zero is greater than 1, if it's 2 or 3, which is what it approximately seems to be right now for the SARS-2 coronavirus, then you're going to actually see the ongoing spread of the virus. But if you can get R sub zero below 1, where the average number of people that a person infects when they have the virus is less than 1, you now are going to stop the spread of the virus, and you could very well drive the virus, in principle, to extinction. And so effective contact tracing is going to be critical, I think, to bring this COVID-19 pandemic under control. The problem is, in order to do contact tracing, you need an army of people, as Governor Cuomo in New York said, to do contact tracing. And then it depends upon people who you are interviewing telling you the truth. It depends on people that you are interviewing remembering who they came into contact with. And if those people were in contact with a large group of people, and some of those people were unknown to them, they didn't know who they were, that they were strangers, this whole contact tracing protocol is going to be destined to fail. So people have suggested that we could make use of smartphone technology to actually do highly efficient contact tracing. So for example, you could develop an app that would make use of GPS technology that would actually monitor every place that your phone has been on a minute-by-minute basis. And so over the span of 2 weeks or a month, there could be a record of every place that you have been. And then if you overlay your GPS history with other people's GPS history, you can, through the use of algorithms, very quickly determine who you came into contact with and when you came into contact with those people. And then you could then use that to identify every person you came into contact with, and hence do highly efficient contact tracing that's going to be highly accurate and is going to require very few people to actually do the work. Now, this, of course, raises all kinds of ethical issues related to privacy, and the list goes on and on. But I could see people, out of fear for the COVID-19 pandemic, spreading it. And believe you me, I'm of the opinion that the wave that we're seeing right now is going to be a walk in the park compared to what's coming, I believe, in the fall and the winter, where there's going to be another wave that's going to even be much worse. There will be a lot of motivation for people to agree to do this kind of contact tracing in order to get this pandemic under control. Now, another opportunity or another technology that's less invasive from a privacy standpoint is essentially using Bluetooth technology, where on your phone you could turn on your Bluetooth, and it would then, again, using certain algorithms, would detect other Bluetooth devices and would keep a record of when and where those contacts took place. And then you could overlay your Bluetooth history with other people's Bluetooth histories and figure out who was it you came into contact with and within a 2-week window of time or a 3-week window of time. Much less invasive from a privacy standpoint, but again, it's a way technology could really help us do effective contact tracing. But now think about this. You're just steps away from actually having a device that you could actually create as a bio-implant that would actually be a Bluetooth-enabled device that would automatically keep track of where you've been and who you have come into contact with. It may not necessarily tell you the location where that contact took place, but it would tell you that you did have contact with that individual person. And so by introducing this as a bio-implant, it would allow you then to essentially have this technology available to you on an ongoing basis, so that when there are other outbreaks of pathogens, everybody would be ready and available to do very effective contact tracing, which again could arrest even the spread of the flu in certain years when the flu virus turns out to be a rather insidious version of the flu virus. So you could begin to envision why people would be willing to actually utilize this technology, because of the after effects, the after fear, the psychological effects of, again, the COVID-19 pandemic. Nobody was going to want to go through this again, and I think the worst is yet to come, sadly. Now, there's another idea that, again, relates to bioimplants, and this is the idea of using vaccines that in which you would, in the vaccine cocktail, include quantum dots, which are these nanometer size semiconductors that actually emit light. And you can introduce these quantum dots into a vaccine where that vaccine could be delivered through a needle that would be injected into your skin, and that needle could be such that it would dissolve away, leaving behind the quantum dots on the surface or just underneath the surface of your skin, which then would allow people to very quickly have a record that you actually had the vaccine. Or you could envision the use of other types of quantum dots to tell people, did you test positive? Do you have the antibodies against the COVID-19 virus, right? So you could begin to see where these bioimplants could actually be something that would be a technology that would be widely utilized. Because I could easily see in the near future where people are not going to be allowed to go to airports or to get on board a plane unless they have, again, a record of having a vaccine. And so these quantum dots provide an able record of that. That's very convenient, where you would be like going to a nightclub where people could shine a light on your arm and you would emit light and they would know that you had the vaccine. Or it could be that to go to sporting events or go to movie theaters or go to church, that you're going to have to demonstrate that you have, again, this kind, that you've had the vaccine, that you've been vaccinated. And again, once you start implanting bioimplants in people who are likely to be willing to do this, you now are making the idea of creating human-machine amalgams, human-machine hybrids, that much more amenable to people. That much people are going to become much more comfortable with that. And so the point here is this, is that these are legitimate uses of gene editing technology. These are legitimate uses of, again, bioimplants that could actually, again, play a critical role in actually bringing this COVID-19 pandemic under control. And I think very few people are going to really push back against these particular applications of gene editing or bioimplants, because they see the enormous amount of good that can be accomplished with this. But ultimately, by again, seeing what could be accomplished with this technology, and by actually experiencing the use of this technology on each of us as individuals, we're going to be, again, much more amenable to what transhumanists are actually proposing as we move into the future in terms of modifications of our biological makeup. We're going to be that much more comfortable with that idea. And this will then accelerate, I think, acceptance and the credibility of the transhumanist movement, particularly when the technology we're talking about, if it delivers and plays a role in solving the COVID-19 pandemic crisis, is going to, again, give greater credibility to using this technology for, again, human enhancement purposes. Where, again, in each of these applications, you are right there in that gray zone between, is this a biomedical treatment or is this actually a human enhancement? And so, again, the skids are greased towards a future of transhumanism. And people are going to find the transhumanism gospel to be very appealing, because our culture, our world is becoming increasingly secular. And people are turning to science and technology to solve problems. Why not to turn to science and technology to solve our ultimate problem, which is our own mortality? Now, one final point of that is this, that for those people that find the transhumanist vision alluring, I would remind you that technology is never without trade-offs. Even when we think about the public health policies that we have been instituting in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, there's always trade-offs. Yes, we can flatten the curve by having people shelter in place, by the use of social distancing, by shutting down non-essential aspects of our economy, but there's also a cost as well, not only in terms of economic hardship, but also because we've devoted so much medical resources to treating COVID-19 patients that we are neglecting people that have other health issues. And this is going to come at a cost, with again, a public health detriment. People are now suffering psychologically because of the quarantine. Mental health issues are also going to arise. That when the economy becomes stagnant, when there's poverty, people are less likely to be able to have access to effective medical treatment. So there are trade-offs in terms of our public health policy where we decided to go down one route, and I'm not necessarily criticizing our decision for sheltering in place and for practicing social distancing, for shutting down parts of the economy. I'm not saying that was the wrong decision. I'm just simply saying that public health policy is technology, and technology comes with trade-offs. And we see this played out right now in front of us. And this is true no matter what the technology is. Technology always has trade-offs. That is, the problem that you're trying to solve with technology, many times you are able to solve that problem. We did flatten the curve, but then there are also going to be trade-offs where you're going to create new problems that didn't exist before, and sometimes those new problems are worse than the problem that you're trying to solve. And what do? You develop new technology to solve those problems, which then introduces more trade-offs. Or there are unintended consequences to a technology that nobody even envisioned when that technology was implemented. And of course, human beings who are inherently wicked and evil can use technology that's intended for good for very wicked and evil purposes. And so the point is that we know from our history with technology that technology never truly delivers on its promises, that technology never truly solves problems, that to think that technology could somehow solve the ultimate problem that we face, which is our own mortality and the inevitable extinction of the human species, is to be naive. If I have any criticism of transhumanists, it's their naivety to think that somehow technology truly is going to create a utopian future. I don't think that's the case whatsoever. That is, transhumanism ultimately represents a false gospel, and that this, but that what transhumanism is actually exposing, though, is the need that every person has for hope, purpose, and destiny. The recognition on the part of every person that death seems unnatural, that it's a tragedy when individuals die, it's a tragedy if human species dies. There must be a higher purpose to individuals, there must be a higher purpose to humanity, and this is exactly what Christianity is all about, that human beings have infinite worth and value because we bear the image of God, and that everything that we desire that transhumanism allegedly offers us is what the gospel also offers us as well. And it's my view that the gospel of Jesus Christ is the true gospel. And if you want ultimate hope, purpose, and destiny, you're going to find it in a relationship with Jesus Christ. And so I believe that even though the transhumanist agenda will gain credibility, will gain wider acceptance, it will become much less objectionable to people because of the way we're going to respond ultimately and the way we are currently responding to the COVID-19 pandemic, I don't believe that at the end of the day, the transhumanist gospel is actually going to deliver what it promises. And so as people are turning to transhumanism to satisfy this deep need, I would hope that all of us as Christians would be able to articulate, again, the truth of the gospel. So I'm going to bring things to a close by just simply asking you again to please take the time to check in, say hi, let me know who you are, where you're watching from. Also, would invite you to offer your thoughts on this really provocative question. Thank you, Nikos, for bringing this question even to my attention. And then also take a moment and let me know what it is that you would like to see in a future broadcast, what topics that you would like me to cover, what questions you would like me to address. Until next time, I'm going to leave you with this thought: the more that we know about science, the more that we have reasons to believe. God bless each and every one of you. I pray that you stay safe, that you stay healthy, that you remain in good spirits. Until next time.